Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making. Help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guests. With me today is Ida Tetlock, who serves clients as a professional organizer, life manager, and advocate. She is also a student of thanatology and death doula candidate. Stan Walters, also known as the Lie Guy, teaches government agencies, military units, and law enforcement to uncover the truth, deliver justice, and make critical decisions in high-stakes situations. And Annie Yatch is founder and CEO of North Star Leadership, helping corporate professionals convert instinctual behaviors into empathy-driven leadership. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
And here is today's topic. Have you ever pretended to hold more progressive views than you truly endorse to succeed socially or academically? That's the question posed by The Hill in confidential interviews with 1,452 undergraduate students at Northwestern University and the University of Michigan. 88% said yes. The pressure to conform can be nearly irresistible, for good reason. Many are concerned by reports that all 87 members of NPR's executive board are registered Democrats, and that Democrats outnumber Republicans among Yale faculty by 28-1. Truth cannot survive in an echo chamber. It thrives on constructive disagreement and spirited debate. That's why it would be equally disturbing if Republicans outnumbered Democrats by a similar margin. But there may be a deeper concern than journalistic or academic integrity. According to The Hill, 73% of students reported mistrust in conversations about these values with close friends. Nearly half said that they routinely conceal beliefs in intimate relationships for fear of ideological fallout. In other words, we're witnessing a culture in which young people are afraid to be honest in their closest relationships, which implies that they are likely mistrustful of those whom they most depend on for emotional and psychological well-being. Should we be sounding the alarm over a system that is setting up young people for ever-escalating dysfunction? If not, why not? And if so, what can we do about it? The floor is open.
All right, well, I guess I can go if you guys want me to start us off. Well, I think that for many of us, especially if we think about how we were when we were young, I feel like we equated silence with survival, but there's always a cost, right? And so I think that the cost that we're appreciating now and beginning to be more aware of is the cost of the nervous system. So I think for a lot of us, we've witnessed that when people are quieter, they don't share their beliefs, they don't feel comfortable or authentic at sharing what they're feeling and experiencing. They end up going into everything from anxiety to depression to burnout to a nervous system that is amplified. And that's not giving us an authentic voice. And it's not giving these youngsters an authentic voice because they're so afraid. And I think it is something that we all have to jump on board with and start working on for ourselves individually to calm that nervous system, but then also to try to teach the youth that a calm nervous system and being who you are is actually the only way you create impact in the world.
You're saying there's a physiological as well as a psychological and emotional element here too.
Correct. And that's what I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, for good reason.
I think one of the problems that maybe in that development that Anna's touched on is that we've never learned how to engage in non-emotional conversations or are allowed to be open with someone for fear of rejection. So that sense of belonging sometimes comes to play. And as my mind was running through the question, these young folks are in a college setting. It's a very authoritarian setup. And strange leap, I know, but some of the work I do is on false confessions. And in those false confessions, there's fear, there's manipulation going on, there's coercion that's going on. And so the person, for the easiest way out, gives up what they think will allow them to survive. So maybe this very authoritarian setting, which is supposed to be open for dialogue, is not perceived by the students and not protected by the faculty as being an open forum for discussion. So they feel vulnerable if they say anything and then get condemned and lose a position for it.
Yeah, and that's something that's really it's a drum that the right has been beating in particular the last few years with all the concerns about cancel culture. And exactly what you're describing is college is supposed to be a forum of open ideas. The safe space is supposed to mean I'm safe to investigate perhaps unconventional points of view, um, alternative possibilities of interpretation. And if we start fearing repercussions, then we do shut down exactly like we're describing here. And it's not just that the repercussions are coming from the institution, they're now being perceived as potentially coming from any or all of our peers. And so the situation seems to be becoming more acute and more oppressive, at least perceived that way, which means that the solution is perhaps becoming more and more elusive. Ida, you have any thoughts?
I do. So in agreement with what Stan and Annie had mentioned, I think a lot of it is innate from where we begin in the behaviors. But what I've been noticing is it's really a lot about influence. So it's the social influence. It could be the peers around us, it could be our own family members and the relationships that we have. But there's also that influence of really not knowing what's real and not real, what's factual and what might be, in the world of AI and misinformation. I think it's difficult for people to really share what they may believe or what they're truly aligned with because they're not certain what it is. So, if they voice an opinion or are on a side and someone challenges it with information that might not be accurate, then I think it's that feeling vulnerable and maybe that they're not knowledgeable enough to be able to share and participate. And I think that's where that quiet goes in and where people tend to retreat more. And I've been noticing it all ages, from seniors that I work with, including the youth that I work with. And I don't think it's something completely new. It's something that we've all gone through. But I think today it's a lot more difficult because we seem to be polarized one side to another, and people are having a difficult time of actually coming up with an opinion and where they stand on things and feeling so insecure as a result.
I think that's a really important point that I think many of us, and I'm using the general term intentionally, we haven't thought through fully all of our positions and all of our opinions. And I include myself. I mean, this is my job to be able to articulate difficult and complex ideas. But I'm conflict averse. I don't want to get into sort of heated arguments, and I don't want to feel like I may not be completely up to the task of defending a point of view in the moment. And so I may back away from a discussion rather than engage, even if I have the opportunity to help somebody see another point of view. And certainly for young people, that this is a time to start developing these ideas and developing these skills to be able to think through, and also the willingness to be able to say, okay, I hadn't considered that. Let me reevaluate my point of view. So, yeah, Andy, please.
I was saying, I think it also really depends on where everyone's coming from, right? Because if you think about the youth of America right now, we've got all these youngsters who are going through a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, right? So their nervous systems are not well regulated. They come from potentially families where conflict was a massive issue for them. So they don't want to necessarily step into conflict because it reminds them of their past. So I think we're dealing with so many, relevant issues here all at once that come together in this concept of mistrusting ourselves, not knowing who we are, not knowing what we stand for. I think that's a big piece of it, because if we're always trying to fit in, we're never going to be our true selves. And I wish there had been more done almost when I was younger to help me identify, who are you? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What leads you? What gets you passionate about something? But we really don't do a lot of it, and we just assume that over time we'll figure ourselves out. But I don't know about you, Stan, or you, Ida. I feel like at 45, I'm still figuring out what my identity is, what battles I want to fight, what conflict I want to jump into. And I think because conflict in general is such a nervous thing for most people, I think that if we could look at conflict in a totally different way and see it as a growth, an opportunity for growth and truth, I think that might start to shift how we look at what we share and what we don't share.
I think kind of a parallel to what the students are experiencing. And I know you're on the platform. Ida, do you do presentation groups or anything like that, or in front of audiences?
I do some, yeah, but very little, smaller groups, community.
Well, Yonason and Ann and I probably do a lot. I've got 50,000 hours on the platform. But I found, and when you think of deception, there's polite deception. What'd you think of dinner? If you told them it tasted like cat food, you're not going to get invited back. And so there's things that we protect the social order. And the typical deception, most common, is omission. And so the students withholding that position is that omission, that's a protected private part of myself. And if I expose that, how much do I put myself at risk? So as on a platform, I'm in an audience that I can have consensus bias, think they all believe and think like I do. So I have to be as neutral as I possibly can within my presentation. And because I'm typically on a witness stand as an expert witness and so forth, I have to be very, very careful of what goes out on my social media because they'll strip through all that and it'll come right back to me on the witness stand. So in a way, Annie, and we all as speakers and presenters have to be very, very guarded about our audience and what you say now, will it come back and haunt you down the road?
Yeah, and that self-censoring is, I mean, we use that sort of as a pejorative, but it's also can be a business decision.
Mhm.
I there are certain things that I rarely talk about in my writing and my
Mhm.
speaking because I know they're just winners. I start talking politics, I'm immediately going to lose half the audience, and since I'm a moderator, I'm probably going to lose all the audience. And
Mhm.
then I'm no longer positioned to be able to influence people where I could be able to.
Yeah, yes, yes.
So it's actually it's a strategic or a tactical choice.
Yeah.
You reminded me, Stan, that Rabbi Abraham Twersky, very influential person, certainly in my life and many others. He passed away a few years ago, and I heard a story from his son that the first time he was making the Sabbath meal for himself at home, and his daughter came by to check on him and see if he's okay. And he says, "Sure, I know everything your mother did, and I know how to do it." And his daughter said, "Well, wait, you didn't make this one dish." He says, "I know." She said, "Why not?" He says, "Because I don't like it."
Oh,
And she said, "What do you mean you don't like it? I mean, you always thanked mother for making it." He says, "Well,
yeah.
sure. She did a lot of work. She liked it. And why would I want to take that away from her?"
Mhm. Mhm.
So, when you talk, we think about white lies, but the way you framed it, Stan, as a lie of omission, sometimes just not revealing the truth
Mhm.
is beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
But if we can't clearly delineate when that's a positive thing and when it's negative,
Right.
then we're down that slippery slope awfully fast, aren't we?
Well, I think it's also difficult, I think, in the culture that we have, right? What I've seen with a lot of the influencers that I've worked with is they're like, Annie, how vulnerable can I get when I share about my life? Or how bold can I get when I state something, right? Because now I think what we're starting to see also as another trend is that as you start to build your influencer status, you're being more bold, you're being more aggressive with things, you're trying to really polarize your audience so that you know exactly who your audience is. At least that's what a lot of my clients have been sharing. And it's been interesting to watch how, on one end, we're being told you have to have a brand that really speaks and connects and is very focused and target and niche. And the other hand, we're like, but don't create too much conflict because then you're going to have a lot of haters. And I've been of the mindset recently where I've been thinking, I would rather be so authentically myself that the people that love me want to spend a lot of time with me, and the people that are repulsed by it or thrown off or, burst out of my life because of it, I would rather have the people that are my core tribe who are connected to what I'm saying than
Mhm.
to go down the path of omission. And so, but that's been a new thing. That's only been in my, I would say in my 30s and 40s that I've been willing to do that and put myself out there. And I think when you're a student and you're supposed to be learning, it's very hard to trust what you think and how you would put a debate together because you just don't necessarily always feel that you have the background or that all the information that you should to be in that debate or conflict process.
I think that's what it is in terms of lived experience. So we're able to do things as we get older, we've had the experiences or witnessed others' experiences and have learned from that. So I think part of it is being a student, you don't have that confidence. Some lead and are exceptionally well right from a young age, but those that are a little bit more insecure and still trying to find themselves, and I'm with you, Annie, I'm still finding myself. I think I'm going to be a lifelong learner. And I don't want to change that. That's authentically me. However, I think from a younger perspective, you think you need to know it all. I think society expects us to be our authentic self. And when we demonstrate or share the attributes of our authentic self, we're chastised, or as you indicated, the haters. That's really relevant because you see it with anyone online that is of any kind of background. As soon as they have the public audience and attention, then you're always going to pull out all the negativity and everything too. So I think for people that are on that cusp, especially students, they don't know where they stand at that point, and it's difficult because how do you emerge through being your authentic self and still be part of a community, whether it's at university or college or in a workplace? You're always kind of going to lean towards what the majority wants to do because you want to avoid that conflict, or you want to be perceived as a team player or an exceptional student. So I think there's always going to be that conflict of self with society and community as a result of it.
I want to throw a bone out and see what you guys think too, as communicators. I don't think we're training our high school students and many adults in what's would really fit in Aristotle's rhetoric or even the concept of persuasive argument or influence. And we don't know how to say something without triggering somebody else. And we don't know how to put together, as Cialdini would say, persuasive argument that's non-offensive, but it is also heard past what some of those barriers are. So maybe our kids are, and I know that particularly, I'm thinking back in college when I was in that year, many years ago, that there was a high political drama going on. And I didn't want to take a side because of the fighting, but I think I felt an absence of how do I string an intelligent argument together and have a congenial conversation with somebody on different topics.
Well, I don't know. I would agree. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Annie.
I was just going to say, I would agree, Stan, for sure, that that's one of the things that we run up against. And I think that the gap that I've been observing is that we don't spend enough time on emotional intelligence and self-regulation with the young people in our worlds, right? Because if we had learned early on, this is how I can be emotionally intelligent about how I regulate my own reaction to what's happening in the environment. And if I have somebody else who's also emotionally and mentally self-regulated, then you can be in that beautiful sort of fun conflict discussion and debate. But it's the second that we don't have the skill set for emotional intelligence and self-regulation that I think we run into a lot of trouble, whether it's on a stage as a youth or even, in current jobs that we have as speakers or running, when we're facilitating events. So I think that you're correct, right? It might be that we're afraid of conflict, but it also might be that we just haven't learned the correct tools for emotional stability and self-regulation.
And we tend to be very emotionally invested in our opinions. Yeah. And so when we're challenged, they're not just challenging our ideas, they're challenging us. And all the worse if we aren't completely secure in how to respond, then we immediately escalate, which generally precipitates escalation on the other side. I have a colleague by the name of Brooke Detterline. You should look her up when we're done here. She has a program called Moral Courage. And she actually works with I think it's college students, maybe high school students too, training role playing. How do you defend your point of view from someone who's attacking you to just become confident in your own ability to articulate what you believe and to do it in a measured way Yeah. Imagine if we could institute that throughout our school system.
I think you hit something that Anna said, and then Ida, with our common experiences, I've been an executor of 3 estates and watched families go to war with each other, and managed on the third one that the attorney said, "Can I hire you to do this to other people?" I've been through 3 of them, but I know Ida, with the different family members, and some see you as an interloper or an interferer, or that it's not your place, or those that you're the anchor that helps them hold things together. So you've got to be seeing that in your work on both sides as working toward doula.
Yeah, absolutely. So with unless it's an individual that is on their own and there are no other family members, or the secondary decision makers are someone on the outside that was also hired versus a family member, that's exactly right. Everybody's perspectives are true to themselves and they're not always aligned. And when it comes to whether they're in a state of disorganization where, they've had a significant life event that's caused them to be disorganized, or, they're dealing with facing a death, or now they're dealing with a loved one's death and having to sort through everything. So it's not just stuff, it's all the things that need to be done to clear up estates. It is always a conflict, because it seems that in, even the most connected and well-loved families, they all have differing points of view of what should happen. And oftentimes bringing in an objective person, so myself, sometimes it's other caregivers, whether it's nursing or a PSW, individuals in the family might feel a certain way. And even on handling prognosis and medical care plan, advanced care plans is completely different, even though they're raised in the same household, the same belief system, whether it's the same faith. And it does make a difference. And I am faced with that, where I'm an intruder rather than someone who is actually helping. And the way I've dealt with it is really the person who I've been hired to support ends up being my priority. Much like you, Stan, with, putting on that objectivity where, yes, I want to support the person that I'm hired to do, but there is that balance, careful balance of making sure that you don't upset the remaining family, because they do have to coexist together and they still have to move forward together. Mm-hmm. There is no easy solution, but it's, for me, what has been key is the listening, understanding where they're coming from, creating that opportunity for dialogue, allowing them also to share where their strengths are, and then supporting them through their weaknesses and helping them understand where my client might be at. And it's the same thing I see with students in the community, any of the volunteer groups that I work with, it's the same thing. I think we need to be understanding, allow for listening, understand where they're coming from, allow them to articulate it in their way. So maybe they're not using the same language or structure that we're used to, and then finding those commonalities to kind of allow everybody to be understood without really picking a side.
This sort of raises an interesting question, that when you're hired to represent one person in a dynamic like this, you still want to deal justly with all the other players.
Absolutely.
So it's not sort of a zero-sum game type of situation.
And being aligned also with my own values and morals, and making sure that it's aligned. If I feel that I'm not aligned, and maybe, depending on the situation, I do excuse myself. So I would be the first to fire myself before someone else would have that opportunity. So I think it's important, and I think it comes with time, lived experience, and wisdom, is that if we become self-aware, we know, where we should belong and where we can contribute. But if we are going to be something that creates more of a deficit for the entire situation, not just the client, then I think we owe it to ourselves to be able to remove ourselves from it as well. So it's not necessarily because I don't understand, or I'm not in favor of the path that they want to take. But I think it's really critical to understand that when you're adding benefit versus creating more of a negative dynamic for everybody involved.
I wonder if you took that same question, Yonason, and you went to a company or two or three companies and they said, we want to interview or ask this question of your employees who've been there 5 years or less. I wonder if those numbers would match what you're getting out of the college, their cohort that they're looking at. Because I think you're in two different universes.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Okay, so let's say that that we asked that same question. Do you feel that you're feel free to express your particular political opinion? So let's say that we went to Goodyear and we said we want to talk to employees who've only been on the job 4 years, and then we went to Eli Lilly, and then we went to Pfizer Chemical. And if you ask those employees the same question you asked those college students who are in a different environment, they're still in a developmental environment, they're not in the real world, I wonder what the difference would be in those numbers, or would there be a difference in whether they shield or not shield their political or faith beliefs?
In other words, you think maybe that there's a longer period of time needed to become comfortable in an environment?
I think it might be. Because like Annie said, they're still figuring out what's my identity. And you've got, for example, males, our frontal lobe doesn't turn on until we're 25, so we make stupid decisions at that point. So we haven't learned that judgmental heuristics hasn't kicked in yet.
Well,
yeah, that's a really good point too.
And I think you make a really good point there, because from all the companies that I've worked with, it really changes the game once you start working on self-awareness within the company itself. Because I think we've been told like business is business, personal life is personal life. And so people start segmenting who they are in different environments. So it's a different identity at home than it's a different identity at work. And I think sometimes that can cause people not to share at work because they think if they do share at work, there's going to be a negative repercussion of that. But I think that the more we build awareness and the more people work on self-development and we become very clear on who we are identity-wise, then we're willing to have conversations that are difficult in our relationships at home or in our work environment. But I think it all goes back to self-awareness and personal development and understanding what in your background actually contributes to your identity so you can form an identity that makes sense to you. And then I think if you have that, you're much more confident about what you're saying, what you're sharing, who you're connecting with, what conflicts you go after or not. Because now I'm very conflict adverse from a young age, but I am more than willing to jump in the middle of a conflict now to try to help both sides see where they're missing each other, because so much is lost because people have such wildly different backgrounds and trauma patterns and varieties of how they grew up.
Yeah, that's kind of what we wanted to head with this is what's the seepage into other aspects of our lives. I have a comment here from Annette, who is a periodic guest on our show. She just couldn't stay away. She says, I think risk taking is a big piece of this too. Kids who have had screens to hide behind do not have much experience with taking risks. Plus, there's a highly unnatural expectation of perfection that also comes from spending too much time online that is pervasive in modern life. And then she adds, you guys are all amazing. Yeah, I agree.
But also that Ida hit, and you touched on, Nancy, was that there's that reaction response in that nervous system. Yes. And so we haven't prepared for this question or that inquiry. Is it a knee-jerk reaction without stopping and thinking responsively, instead of that kick, where am I, and have I really developed my point of view, and is it well fleshed out that I trust myself to articulate it?
Yeah, and I think that goes to Annette's point as well. I mean, I try to set up this program a little differently, but certainly on cable news or so many of these forums, 2 seconds dead air is absolutely unacceptable. Always have to be right there with the answer and the response, and then there's none of this. Well, let's ponder that for a moment. It's gladiatorial combat, and if you let your guard down for 1 second, you've just been skewered by your opponent. The whole forum for what's supposed to be discussion is actually been, I think, distorted into something that's really unhealthy. And then that becomes the model in college, in other places where, constructive disagreement could take place.
Well, I don't know if you all have seen this, but I've been noticing that with couples, right? There's this disconnection that's happening in the nuclear family across the US. And I think it's because so many people I've noticed are still concealing parts of themselves and not being willing to address the bigger problems or the deeper issues. Specifically, say you have an entrepreneur and it's not stable at home. He's sort of adverse to going home and setting the tone and saying like, "Hey, we have to change things here," because he doesn't want to go into that conflict and thinks that his life might get worse if he does. And I feel like there's this almost concealment culture that we've been experiencing a bit, which feels very safe in the moment, but over time conditions our brains to believe that authenticity is dangerous and that we're going to be rejected or harmed for actually being our authentic selves. So I've seen that this concealment has caused so much disconnection, even within our intimate relationships, where people won't even share, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, or this is my boundary, this is not my boundary. So I don't know if you've all been seeing that as well in the work that you're doing, but I would love to hear what you've been experiencing.
I see it in the community, in families in general. So not just couples, but with parents with their children and setting those boundaries. There's the parents that are the way that I was raised, where my parents knew best. We didn't challenge anything. We grew up to follow what our parents told us to do. And we developed later through our own lived experiences and facing things in community. What I've noticed a lot more in some of the family dynamics with families that I'm working with are the parents are wanting the children to be just as important in the family. So there's no clear differentiation between who is making the decision for the family, where there's the authority that has to happen, but on the most part, the families are kind of ebbing and flowing together. And I think there's benefits to that, because I think it helps all the children grow up and develop some of the key attributes that you need to develop your authentic self. And I also find that the challenges with that are they don't understand and experience disappointment or someone saying no, and having different viewpoints because everyone supports each other in what their decision is. So then I think it creates that conflict outside of the family system, where now they're being treated differently than what they're used to in their family or at school. School has a way of running what their policies and procedures are, and relationship management with instructors and professors. And then you're running into those challenges because the children don't know how to cope. They don't know how to respond with some of the no's or the challenges to what their thought process might be. And then I think it creates all that conflict going forward. So for me, I see it changing depending on the environment that I'm in. But I notice more and more that people are adverse to conflict because they're used to people just accepting. So if they're not getting that healthy challenge, they're not learning and growing.
Yeah, maybe you can remember back to when helicopter parent was a popular term, the hovering, right? And then it changed to, what they've got using now is snowplow parents, right? That's to get all the obstacles out of the way and clear a path. So that, and I always like to say that, when the Navy SEALs run obstacle courses, well, why don't they just remove the obstacles and then they could run the course so much faster? Because of course the point is to learn to get over obstacles. And if you let your children struggle when they're young, they'll be better equipped to face the obstacles that arise as they get older. So what presents itself as love and concern and caring for the child in many ways can be setting them up for failure later on in life, no?
I would agree. I've definitely had that issue as a parent. It's a hard thing to manage, right?
Yes.
Because you want them to fail as quickly as possible and have these big life lessons, early on. I don't know if anyone else has had any issues with their children, but the thing that I've found is interesting about my child specifically, I have two little boys, And one of them, we found out that he had been lying about cello practice. And when I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you want to take your cello to school? Why didn't you want to show up and do the testing? He's like, well, mommy, I'm feeling pretty loved. He's like, what's the point? Do I really need to get tested? And I was like, whoa, like if I could have had that way of looking at the world when I was his age, and just to be clear, he's a little bit like a Buddha. I
Yeah.
was like, I could have thought that. Imagine how different aspects of my life might have been to have that level of self-awareness. Now, I'm not saying this happens for all children, right? But I've been fascinated to watch how sometimes if you give them more self-awareness, it's helpful, but I wonder how down the pipeline it might adversely affect them, right? Maybe they'll end up a lot more willing to share their opinion, but then they might have other concerns that come up. So I'm just fascinated when I watch young kids try to figure themselves out, figure out what their identity is, because we all only know our own experience, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dear Facebook. I'm sorry, Annie, I called you Nancy a minute ago. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's
My
okay.
brain was on a student.
All good, all good.
When you look at the number of creative geniuses, people who made tremendous contributions to the world, who went through tremendous struggle when they were young, people who may have had terrible self-esteem problems that felt they had to prove themselves, and that drove them to accomplish great things.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we're sort of in this throw up our hands. What's actually going to benefit children more? We want to give them safe environments. We want to have them have good self-esteem. At the same time, we want them to feel driven and challenged to excel.
Mm.
And it's hard because they don't even know what the definition of excelling or
Yeah.
success is, right? And so I think I've noticed the theme from working with a lot of entrepreneurs. We all, I guess, as entrepreneurs, have some level of traumatic background experience, right? Because it forces us into this mindset of I want to solve problems, I want to make the world a better place, I want to create impact that's different. And
Mhm.
what I've realized is the more an entrepreneur early on in life had to deal with some pretty significant, I'll call it trauma, but it could just be a perceived loss of control. The more the entrepreneur has to experience that, the more sometimes, or the less self-aware they are outside of just that business role. And so you end up with a lot of people in business making great amounts of money who are changing the world in great ways, but they don't have the self-awareness to go after conflict that needs to happen to drive their personal lives forward. So I just think it's fascinating to look at, we can create safe environments, we can teach some skills in self-regulation, we can calm the nervous system, and it might be more than one thing that we need to be creating for these youth to help them to be in a better space. Because I think there's this combination of calming the nervous system and even maybe teaching more self-regulation, emotional intelligence that would allow people to be more willing to step into that arena to have those difficult conversations, knowing they can come out of it and be just fine. Because I think it's fear of reprisal or fear of rejection that sometimes holds us back.
If we put in following up, put a label on all deception as bad, with these young people, and I don't think you can do that, but I don't think these young people their deception is malicious or the line that I see in my job is when you manipulate someone, you withhold information, you coerce them into actions that they want to do, whether they're the bad guy and they've been coerced into confession or the way they've treated their victims. So I don't see these young people as being manipulative in their answers, but like as you mentioned earlier, I think Annie was self-protective.
Mhm.
Is survival protective?
Survival.
But they see their I don't want to say opponent, but the other party being more manipulative and controlling, that they've lost that control that you've mentioned, having a sense of self, and I have my space that I can be comfortable sitting in. How do we get them there?
I think, at least from what I've seen recently, is I've been doing a lot of work with families on how do you give and receive feedback in a way that's connecting? Because what I've noticed in the corporate world is that you give someone feedback, they immediately get defensive. They see it as criticism instead of something to learn and grow from.
Mhm.
And so I've been doing a lot of teaching around how do we give feedback in a way that is connecting instead of disconnecting, which is identifying what story we're telling the world instead of what we think is wrong about the other person. Because I think if you can share, well, this is the story I'm making up in my head about what just happened, and the other person can share, well, this is the story I'm making up in my head about what just happened, then you can start to find a resolution there. And then I also think most of us have nervous systems that are so hijacked by caffeine and alcohol and all these other things that are substances that take us out of our own power and out of our own authority, that the more we can calm the nervous systems of, everyone in our vicinity, the more likely it is that we can have these conversations without taking it personally, if that makes sense. But that's all I've found so far that's been really helpful.
I would agree with that. I think to expand on that, it's really creating forums, regardless of our age, but especially students that are looking at creating a path individually for themselves, looking at either further studies or in their career. But if we create these forums of where disagreement is expected, where we can have consequences that are both positive and negative, but we seek to really understand each other versus that critical. I think we've personalized everything so much so that, you even hear anything that's negative, even though it's not towards you as a person, it's automatically perceived that it's a personal weakness or something you hadn't thought of. So we set that up, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the school system, even in the workplace. We do a lot of this anonymity of where you can share this anonymously, but then you're not owning it, and then you can't seek to understand or further defend your positions either. So for me, it's I think we owe it to our whole community, regardless of age, to really create these forums like this today, where we can talk about it, seek to understand each other, not necessarily have a solution, but it's a means to getting towards certain solutions, to understand people, because that inner conflict, I think, is even harder than the conflict that we're seeing outside. And if we can't understand each other, increase our empathy to understand. We say it all the time, seek to understand and be really empathetic, but it's a lot of talking, a lot of words and a lot of information, but we're not acting it out. We're not allowing that to play out and see kind of where it brings us and do that proper follow-up afterwards. So for me, I think that's what we need to do. I think we all need to, we're all responsible to really help the person next to us get to a point of their authenticity by seeking to understand and also not being fully negative in the challenge. So, we don't need to attack. We can have a disagreement and learn what that respect looks like without being so defensive.
And you sort of lifted one of my favorite lines here, Ida, that the value of these kinds of discussions is not necessarily that we are going to come and solve the world's problems in 45 minutes, but just by engaging in these conversations, it brings the issues more to light. We look at them from different angles, and it just moves us forward collectively. And just I'll wrap up with one of my favorite observations, that there's a biblical commandment to rebuke your neighbor. The Hebrew word for rebuke has the same root as the word for validate. That when we give rebuke in the right way, what we're really saying is, I believe in you and your capacity to improve, to do better, to address something that's not quite right and make it right. And when we give it that way, we did the right time, the right place, the right circumstances, and the right tenor in the way we present it, then it doesn't have to be confrontational at all. It doesn't have to be hurtful. It doesn't have to challenge our self-esteem or our sense of self-worth. These are all skills that we should be working on much younger.
Yeah. Yes.
But continuing this education, because usually all of us can use some help in these things. So we'll end this segment here. For those of you who are interested in the backstage conversation that goes on next, please go to my Substack Look for information there on how you can become a premium member to gain access to that. But I would like to thank the three of you. This is the first time on the program for all of you, and it's been absolutely delightful. So thank you, Ida Tetlock, Stan Walters, and Annie Yatch, for a really thoughtful and stimulating and I think important conversation. For those of you who are watching and listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up in the future, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we'll certainly use it in a future episode. And until then, as always, we encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.
Thank you.